Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications by clicking on the bell icon and never miss a video. We've got lots of Porsche content coming your way.
Whew. Wow, this is comfortable in here.
Oh, I love it. Well, Damon, you're in for a treat. I know you were asking about my 928, and you were looking around the shop and asking what I thought of the various cars, and it's a little bit like a confessional. This is like kind of a safe space in the car here. I have to admit, it took me a long time to warm up to the 928. Yeah. I'm an avowed air-cooled 911 person, and the 928 I always just didn't give a lot of attention to. And a good friend of mine once told me, he says, you got to drive an early 928, a 78 or 79, to really understand the magic. And the first time I drove a good one was about 5 years ago, and the moment I drove that car I thought, I have to have one, and started the mission to find this car. It's a 79 US model 928, and I wanted an all original car, and so this car was 100% original right down to the Porsche CR radio. And this was quite a hunt to find this car, and it's been a love affair ever since.
My confession is I've never been in a 928 when it's moving under its own power. Oh, this is a first for me.
You know, I feel like it was like all these lost years, you know, like lost opportunity.
Yeah.
And so we'll go for a drive, and I'll tell you what I like about the car and why it speaks to me, and kind of what I've learned about them over the last few years. And funny enough, I own a lot of cars, and of all the cars that I own, all the Porsches I own, I drive this car more than any of them, which is kind of shocking. So
that is.
So let's go. Car's cold. I haven't driven it in probably a week or two, but I never mind driving this car. One of the simple things I like about these cars is they're really, really torquey. And so, you know, like I started in second gear. In fact, I read some of the early factory engineers' literature on the car, and they actually designed it to start in second gear if need be. And so it makes it a really relaxing car to drive. So, you know, 4.5 liter, 219 horsepower in the US car, just over 250 pound-feet of torque. It's just kind of an effortless car.
Yeah. It's what, 3,000-ish pounds?
Yeah, the funny thing is they got derided that they were heavy. Yeah. But yes, they're heavier than an SC was in period by a couple hundred pounds, but by modern standards, you know, they're, you know, lighter than a 991 or something. Yeah. And so, but super smooth. You know, when they're cold, the transmission uses some of the same internals and design of like a 915. So they're a little bit stiff to shift when they're cold, particularly the early cars. So oftentimes will shift from second to third, or first to third, kind of skip shift it. It's got plenty of torque to pull it off. They have a really tall shift lever. I remember looking at that years ago and thinking, oh man, I'd have to cut that down. But actually, because it's a little bit higher effort, you actually want the leverage of the taller shift lever. And, but yeah, they're just, I guess the things that speak to me, all the feel of the various inputs. So that the heft of the steering is really remarkably good. It just has just the right amount of weight to it, particularly sort of mid-corner. The feel of the brakes, they just feel like, particularly in reflecting upon how other cars felt in period in 1979, it feels like it's got 2x the brakes of like an SC or something. It just, they give you a great sense of confidence. Yeah. You mentioned the seats. I love the seats in the car.
You know what I'm noticing too, not just the seats, but look how open it is. I don't know if I've ever been in a car that feels this open in the front seat, on the passenger side at least.
Yeah. The other thing is I just adjusted the heat down, but the HVAC system in this car works so good. And I don't mean just by cranking out heat or cranking out AC, which it does that, but the way that the airflow in the cabin works, and this is a simple thing, but it has a center vent, which is always fresh air. So you can, for example, have the heat on and you can add a little bit of facial fresh air. So it has this kind of cooling, it's just kind of a very comfortable car to drive, you know, like a lot of hours, because you as a driver aren't fatigued. The pod, when you adjust the steering wheel, the whole pod moves, so you always have a perfect view of the gauges. So
that was an early system like that. I don't think many cars, by the 70s had movable pods like that.
No, and so visibility is really good. And like a lot of other cars in period, you've got pretty thin pillars, so you've got excellent, cabin visibility, both the side and forward. But from a safety standpoint, and not that I concern myself a whole lot. I drive old cars, 914s and 356s, but from a crash standpoint, I've looked at some of the early crash data on these cars is really good. So it's a good car to, for example, my wife and I, take a big long weekend in. I feel like we're not risking our life being in this car. And then something as simple as this, we're in third gear, we're at 1,000 RPM, and if I want to step on it, the car just pulls nicely from, essentially from 1,000 RPMs all the way up, and just sounds good.
Yeah, it does.
Pulls good.
Yeah.
And
going over that bump, that was like nice.
Oh, ride quality.
Was there a bump?
Yeah, ride quality on this car.
Wow.
It's so well damped. If there's anything I don't like about the early cars, they look like they sit kind of high up in the front end, and I've thought about adjusting that, but then I think, God, the ride handling balance on this car is so good that I'm hesitant to do that.
Well, if I ever buy an early 928, I'll do it for you and let you know how it goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, the other thing, of course, one of their big engineering marvels was the Weissach axle in these cars, and so, a lot of people think, oh, they're just a big interstate car. No, these cars handle. They're so good in the corners.
Yeah.
They're so, I could
Very
go on
solid.
for days about how that works. So yeah, I mean,
There we go. German muscle car.
Oh yeah, and then they're so flat in the corners, and the feel on them is just.
Yeah. For how soft they ride quality wise, they are very flat.
Yeah.
They don't lean.
Like I said, I go out to my garage, and I'm just almost embarrassed to admit this, but I go out and look at the cars, and most of the time I think, you know what? I'm taking the 928 today. It's just an easy car to live with. And I want to be careful I phrase that, because sometimes I buy into that lore of like, oh, it's old and comfortable. It's a GT car. No, this car will boogie. I mean, we can, I've gone on some club drives, and you want to go, really drive the car. Man, I have no qualms at how this car, handles or performs. About the only drawback to it, I will say, is it's a thirsty little sucker. Probably the worst fuel mileage of any Porsche I own. I mean, I pretty consistently get around 15, which isn't great, although it does take non-premium fuel. How do you like that?
That is nice. That's better than the Cayman that I own. So,
it's the simple stuff, but 8.5 to 1 compression, so not real high compression, and motors on these are really robust.
What's interesting is that when I first started learning about the 928 years and years ago, I always thought that the automatic was like the default transmission all the way through the whole model run, and that it would be super tough to find any 928 with a 5-speed manual, yet here's a 5-speed manual.
Yeah, so the penetration of the automatic increased with each sales year, and so it wasn't all that common in the early cars, and then with each passing year it became more and more common. And to me, I don't have a lot of interest in having one with an automatic, but for many people they think it's wonderful. So, there's certainly, I'm sure, pros and cons to them. But
sounds like if you want a manual, then maybe an early car is the easier place to find a 928 with a transmission like that, huh?
Yeah. So just a really, again, I just think so highly of these cars.
What's the longest drive you've taken it on?
I did a trip down to California in it. I've done a couple 700-mile days in this car.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's super comfortable, and the air conditioning is great. It's just a car I don't find fatiguing. Maybe I'm dating myself. I've been driving air-cooled 911s for a long time. I can drive like my early 911 all day. I absolutely can do it. I can do back-to-back days like that. I've done it. But I find that I'm definitely tired. When I head to the hotel at night, I feel spent.
Yeah.
This one, I feel like, man, I could go to the hotel. I could maybe go out and have dinner with friends. I'm not spent after driving this car.
Yeah.
Yet I still find it really enjoyable to drive. And I'm actually a little worried about saying too many good things about these early cars, because I think, heck, we might drive the values up on them. They already have come up quite a bit.
Yeah.
But and then I've driven some of the later ones, and they have their charms as well. But to me, I guess as a purist for Porsche and the brand, I'm thrilled they didn't get rid of the 911 in place of the 928. But I understand how they could have engineered this car and had the thought that was possible, right?
Yeah.
And one of my big things with various types of Porsches, whether it be 911s, 928s, Panameras, Cayennes, whatever we want to talk about, is that sometimes in our world we like to say, well, gosh, the best Porsche is, this one or that one. And I always tell people it's not a mutually exclusive game. Like, I can love this 928, and it doesn't diminish the love that I have for one of my 911s or a 914 as an example, because they each offer something different.
It's another tool in the chest, use on a day where you wouldn't want to drive a 914.
Yeah, but in totality, if I had to have one car that did everything and I wanted a classic experience, I think these make a pretty compelling case. And I know that if I had to thin my collection down, several 911s would leave before this car would. Yeah.
So how does this car differ from behind the wheel from, let's say, a later S4 or GT or GTS? If you've driven those.
So obviously they're very connected. So you can feel the 928 DNA is alive and well, whether you drive a early 78 all the way through a 95 GTS. The things, pros and cons, as they get newer, they gain power, so they become faster.
Yep.
And so when I was younger, I used to always assume that faster was better. And sometimes I tell people sometimes faster isn't better, it's just more.
Yeah.
Well,
faster
okay.
is faster, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know that sounds kind of crazy to say, but what I like about this car is it's really enjoyable to rev up, it's torquey, it's effortless. So I could have more of that, but it doesn't mean I would necessarily enjoy the experience more. I will say the later cars, they did make the shift feel a little bit smoother. This car is a little bit bulky, but again, more akin to a 915, and the later cars feel a little bit more smooth and refined in that regard. The cabin feels remarkably similar. They really didn't change the greenhouse or much of it in here a whole lot, so that feels really related. Brake feel, I don't think, is actually any better on the later ones, even though they get more brake and they get ABS. The two things I don't like is I find the later ones, the steering got too heavy. I like the steering feel in this early car. It's lighter, and I'm real big into light steering feel. That's kind of a big thing to me, kind of akin to why I like early 911s. So the steering feel got heavier, and I would say oddly enough, like your seat of the pants, if there's such thing as a butt dyno, we call it. I don't know what the butt dyno version is for weight would be, but driving this car, it feels light and pure. And each generation of 928 to me, farther from this, ends up feeling a little bit just more substantial, but not necessarily in a good way. Like more damped, the steering gets to be too heavy. Each input just feels a little bit too one step removed.
Growing up when I was younger, I always thought that the GT, the S4s and the GT's later cars, because they had more power and just the dominant car, one of the fastest cars. Oh, look at that, a little bit of a tail wiggle there.
Yep.
Huh? Yeah. But kind of like the 996, my view on the 928 has changed over the years, styling wise.
Yeah.
And I really like this styling more than I do the later cars in this day and age.
Yeah, I agree with you. I remember thinking when the S4 came out, I really liked the flush taillights, and I liked the rear spoiler, and I thought it was beautiful. And I still think it's a pretty car, don't get me wrong, but I just find this original design to be very elegant. The other thing that is really interesting about this car is demographically, the people, the attention, not that I don't drive a car for the attention I get in public, but I do note who makes a comment or what sort of feedback I get. And I tend to get more feedback from younger people about this car. They respond to this car in a way that they don't to sort of maybe my classic impact bumper 911 era car.
Yeah.
So I get a lot of, for example, 18-year-old-ish boys will comment on this car. In fact, we just drove past about a 10-year-old kid, and he's still staring at us.
Yeah, right.
I mean, look, it's so great, right? Because this car doesn't look like any other car on the road. And of course, the other fun thing, I don't know if we'll capture it in the video, but you put the headlights up. I love the look of the headlight pods when you're driving the car. It's
it looks like, it's almost like steampunkish from back here.
Yeah.
The way they look.
I mean, even listen to this thing at idle. It's just so smooth.
Yeah. It's a little lumpy, but not like LS lumpy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a V8.
Yeah.
But it's not an American V8. It's got its own sort of tune and rhythm.
I really like that turn you did back there, that little section right there.
Yeah.
For something, what gets me is for something that is soft in the ride department, how well it just responds to inputs.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, but just,
And, all right, you're good.
Well, Damon, you were asking me about the 928, and you were saying, what does it speak to you? And I said, it was sort of it took me some time for it really to speak to me, but the more time I spent with this car, the more time I interact with it, the longer I own it, the more I appreciate it, and it's lots of little subtle things. And much like you, we were talking about, as the 928 developed over time from the original 928, like this car, to the 928S and 928S4, GT and GTS. And as a younger man, I really appreciated the bigger fenders and the front spoiler and the rear spoiler. But the more I looked at it, the more I just liked the elegance of the original design. I loved this original front fender. I love how the headlight is laid back here. I like the simplicity of no front spoiler. I really, really, really came to love the phone dial wheels. In fact, that was one of my pivotal sticking points when I was looking for one of these early cars. I said, okay, it's got to be in a period color. This is called Hellblau. It has to have phone dial wheels. It cannot have the rub strips down the side, which just ruins the lines of the car. It certainly can't have a sunroof. It certainly can't have a rear spoiler. This elegance, this original design was so good.
Everything you're saying, I'm agreeing with. And now my favorite part is right where you're standing.
Yes. Now this is a simple thing. Like, I love this rear window shape. I like how it rolls into the rear hatch. I love the color of the window tint. This is the dumbest thing, but they come from the factory with kind of a bronzy gold window tint, which matches so well with the anodized side trim. About the only change from original, if you're a real nerd for these cars, you'll spot, I hate the fact the original wheels sit inboard, so I did add 25mm rear spacers to bring the wheels out, as I think they should have been from the factory. Moving to the back, I love how the sort of rear Porsche logo is sort of embossed into the bumper cover here.
I like the lack of a rear spoiler.
Oh, I love this rear wiper design. I know it sounds dumb, but just this double arm, we were talking about that. I love how it sits on the rear here. I love the 928, how it's embossed into the rear trim. It's a lot of little visual delights that they did really, really well. And the car is aged so well. I get a lot of comments on this car from people in the public, and they're always shocked to hear this is a 45-year-old car. I mean, how radical this car was in 1979. And then, of course, some of the other things with Porsche that's common is the heft of all the controls. So, like, even the squeeze of the trigger, it's substantial. And when you open that door, it's just very well damped. It feels expensive. I don't know how else to describe it. I was looking this up. I have the original window sticker on this car. It was $35,550 in 1979, which inflation adjusted is $161,000, which is just mind-boggling to me.
That's crazy, but it's almost right on par with some of today's V8 Porsches.
Yeah, but yeah, just again, I love this about regular 911s, but the way that door sounds when you close it, the way it sounds when you open it. And then just simple things they did really, really well, like these little door pockets. Other Porsches have terrible door pockets. I love the little pivoting door pocket. It's got a little release here. It feels very satisfying. You know, your wallet and keys go in there. It's really a wonderful thing. Something as simple as the HVAC vents are in the doors. So you can see it carries through from the dash into here when you close the door. So you got your heat and your AC flowing here. It's frankly the first Porsche that has functional HVAC that works really, really well. And again, the seats, they remind me a little bit, if you're familiar, a really, really rare option on earlier 911s is called the Furman seat. And these remind me of that. Supremely comfortable for a really long ride. And just, I could just go on for days about this car. I will complain about one thing. One of the things that I think is actually really funny. For the $161,000 inflation adjusted, they didn't have an automatic trunk release, which drives me crazy. I'm driving this car, I got to get out my key. As an aside, they have very cool keys. The keys, most substantial key you'll ever see on a Porsche. It's really great. But we were talking about that rear wiper. Actually, the motor is not mounted to the glass like it was beyond like a 944. It uses a cam, and then the motor mounts down below. Super, super cool. And then only on the early cars, they have this really elegant rear cargo cover, which actually isn't all that practical, but I like it. And then they have the world's best toolkit. The toolkit on these cars is great. So that's what the toolkit looks like. I'm kind of a nerd for toolkits on early 911s, and I just love it. And if you're really lucky, you even get the little factory bulb box that they come with. A little set of bulbs.
Oh, this is amazing.
Yeah, it's really just a visual delight.
Yeah.
I won't go so far as to open it, but underneath, the battery sits in the back. We have 50-50 weight distribution. Great storage, great visibility. Yeah, I mean, we already did the drive. I kind of extolled the virtues of driving this car. Honestly, the fatal flaw in the 928 is that it was underappreciated for so long that try to find an OB, what we call an OB, which would be a 78 or 79 928 in this condition with all original paint and all original upholstery and no cracked dash. I mean, heck, this one even has its original CR radio. I will say that it's one thing they didn't do a great job. Those don't sound great, but I do love it. It's got a nice warm glow when you turn it on. And but just unobtainium to try to find a good early 928. And the market's really starting to see that. We're seeing some six-figure sales on fully restored, OB 928s. I personally love original cars, so when I found this car, it was love at first sight. I had to do quite a bit mechanically to get it back up to speed. That's the other thing I've learned. I want to dispel that myth about reliability and cubically expensive. And I'll be really transparent. I think I spent around $15,000 mechanically sorting the car out, doing timing belt and various things. But since then, I've put almost 10,000 miles on the car, trouble-free. I would drive this car anywhere. And every last thing on this car works exactly the way it is supposed to, right down to the radio, the cruise control, the HVAC functions, the power door locks. Everything is as it should be. And so I look at it and think that's actually been a pretty darn good bargain. So yes, a bad 928 could cost you a lot of money, but a good one, oh, so good. So if you're lucky, find yourself an early 928.